Let's turn to the fact that while we're waiting for the two Super Bowl teams to declare themselves, we've got a bunch of teams still. Now here we are, 19 days removed from the end of the regular season, and the coaching carousel is still spinning, but some spots are beginning to fill, and the latest one came last night. Matt Eberflus. The Bears go from Ryan and Matt as GM and coach to Ryan and Matt as GM and coach. Now it's Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, the former defensive coordinator of the Indianapolis Colts. He was there for 4 years. He's the guy who took the job with the expectation Josh McDaniels was coming to Indy as the head coach and never did, but thrived under Frank Reich. Now Eberflus will reportedly become the next coach of the Chicago Bears. Your thoughts on that, Peter?
The irony of, in that same weekend, Josh McDaniels possibly now moving to the front of the line and being the favorite in Oakland is just kind of bizarre, to put it mildly. That Matt Eberflus gets a job, and who knows, maybe Josh McDaniels gets one 2 days later. But look, I think that every time we get to this point of the offseason where the hiring starts, I think one of the things that we see is that after it starts, then everything goes in a rush. Okay? And just because now this year a very, very weird thing happened, and the first coach wasn't hired until 16 days after the regular season ended. And in 4 of the last 9 years, by 16 days after the regular season ended, every coach had been hired. It's a little bit different this year for a lot of reasons. But I think the Eberflus hiring basically says to the Chicago Bears, look, we know and we understand that we need a mentor for Justin Fields. We got it. We get it. We haven't forgotten that. But in the interviews we've done and in the people we've gotten to know through this whole process, that's how good Matt Eberflus has been. And that's how much better he's been than the offensive brains that we have talked to during the course of this process. So, Mike, one of the reasons, if I was a Bears fan, I would be thinking, I like this hire, is very simply because everybody thought coming into it, they're going to get a coach to basically oversee Justin Fields. And now they obviously go to the defensive side of the ball. And the one thing I said when I heard this is Eberflus had to have told Ryan Poles and the Bears, I got a plan for Justin Fields. Here it is. And at his opening press conference or whenever, I'm dying to hear that plan.
Well, and Peter, this is a concern that I mentioned this yesterday, I think. We come back around to the same takes based upon what the calendar says. And late January takes as coaches are being hired, for me, includes a very simple point, especially if I've got a young quarterback that I'm trying to not ruin. To paraphrase what John Mara, the Giants co-owner, said the other day, they've done everything to destroy Daniel Jones over the last 3 years. And it is very real. You can take a quarterback and you can drop him in one city with one coaching staff and one organization, and he thrives and becomes a superstar. Take that same guy, put him somewhere else into a dysfunctional pit, and the various dysfunctional pits out there know who they are. I don't have to name them right now, although I probably will at some point during the show, but I digress. And he's a disaster. And my concern here, and this is nothing against Matt Eberflus, this is nothing against him. My concern is if he comes in, hires a great offensive coordinator, that offensive coordinator works. It's like, the way trains, how they lock together, the two cars on the trains lock together. That's what happens with new offensive coordinator and Justin Fields, and the Bears become great. What happens next? Offensive coordinator gets his own head coaching gig, and then you got to do it all over again. Lather, rinse, repeat.
That's the way the carousel works?
Yeah. Well, not if you get an offensive coach. Not if the guy who couples with your quarterback is going to be there because he's the head coach. That's why I'd err on the side of taking an offensive guy that I'm going to match up with Justin Fields and make sure he's going to be there, ideally for 10 years with Justin Fields, because if we're successful with a defensive guy, you better have a plan for the next guy. And then if you're successful, the next guy. And if you're successful, the next guy. Look at Andy Reid. He's got the revolving door, assuming that Eric Bieniemy eventually gets a head coaching job. And I'm starting to think that he's going to get left in Kansas City again. But it's no concern because Andy Reid is the one ultimately with the Patrick Mahomes relationship. That's my point. You're successful, you're going to lose your coordinators. And if you're a defensive guy and you lose your offensive coordinators, you just got it's going to be that, the Alex Smith thing where every year you got a different offensive coordinator. I don't want that for my young quarterback.
I understand that, Mike, but here's a question. So, let's take Kansas City. Even though Andy Reid's an offensive guy, a smart head coach basically says to his staff, I'm not just grooming us to have a coordinator who's really good, but I'm grooming the next coordinator. Okay, and right now that's Mike Kafka, for Andy Reid. And I understand that Andy's on the offensive side of the ball, so it doesn't matter as much as if he were a defensive coach. But in my opinion, what Matt Eberflus has to be thinking, honestly, when you think about it in another way, following the Andy Reid example, it's what happened when Sean McVay got really, really good on offense, and so they started to handpick, or to take away his offensive coaches. And in one off season, he loses his coordinator Matt LaFleur, and he loses his quarterback coach Zach Taylor to the Packers and Bengals respectively. But look at how they have rebounded, and that's why. And I understand those are all offensive side of the ball guys. But the one thing I would say, Mike, is if the biggest thing you would be concerned with, oh my God, the Bears are going to win 12 games next year, Justin Fields is going to be hot as a firecracker, and John Doe, the offensive coordinator, is going to get a head coaching job somewhere, I'll sign up for that. I'll sign up for figuring out then who is going to be the guy to replace John Doe.
Justin Fields may not. When you're hiring a coordinator, offensive or defensive, you're making a projection. We talked about this a lot with Eric Bieniemy, that it's not an issue of he doesn't interview well. That's bogus. That's BS. Everybody I've talked to has said he interviews great. The projection, though, is great coordinator. Can great coordinator become great coach? Is great coordinator ready to become great coach? And you just don't know. The streets of NFL failure are littered with coordinators who never were able to thrive at a fundamentally different job. It's one of the chapters in Playmakers. Gratuitous plug. The Peter Principle, that's what it is. Over and over and over again. Matt Nagy, even though he was Coach of the Year in 2018, ultimately he couldn't do the next level job up. And maybe they went, we see this trend in the NFL where when you fire a coach, the next guy's the exact opposite. I mean, maybe it's as simple in Chicago as our last guy was an offensive coach. Let's just go with the defensive coach. And I know I'm grossly oversimplifying it, but I want to know that there's two critical relationships: the GM and the head coach, and the head coach and the quarterback. And I for that reason, if I've got a young quarterback that I'm trying to grow and develop and groom, and I want to become my franchise's first franchise quarterback, true franchise quarterback since Sid Luckman, I'm going to be making the projection with an offensive coordinator, not a defensive coordinator. That's just my own personal preference, but it's formed by 20 years of, watching how these things work, or as the case may be, don't work.
I'm going to tell you one quick story that is slightly tangential to this, but I think informative about this. And that is that 10 years ago this winter, Peyton Manning was flirting with a bunch of teams. And near the end, it came down to he was very interested in the Denver Broncos. And so The two coordinators of the Denver Broncos at the time were Mike McCoy and Jack Del Rio. And he had a meeting with them, and he goes, listen, I want to know that you guys are going to be here. The worst thing that can happen is if we get something good going and the coordinators leave and we got to erase the blackboard and start all over again. And they both said, hey, we're not going anywhere. We love it here. We want to build something here. Blah, 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 blah. 1 year later, the Broncos have a great year, and Mike McCoy's the coach of the San Diego Chargers. And, and look, over the 4 years that Peyton Manning was there, they're the highest scoring offense in football. So they figured it out with a succession of offensive coaches, including Adam Gase after that. All I'm saying is, Mike, you've got to take the best head coach of the guys who you interviewed. You can't say, well, look, we loved Matt Eberflus, but John Doe over here, he's 87% of Eberflus, but he can coach the quarterback. I don't think you operate your franchise that way.
Well, big difference between Peyton Manning and Justin Fields. Let me go farther than that. Huge difference. Peyton Manning was the offensive coordinator. Peyton Manning's the finished product. Justin Fields is the lump of clay that we don't know what the hell he's going to be. So we want to have, and I don't know what the term is. What's the term for a guy that works with clay? Whoever that is, sculptor? Maybe it's sculptor. I don't know. I've been hanging around with Sims way too long. Sculptor. You want a sculptor who can take that piece of clay and turn it into something good. Manning was done. He was finished. He was a masterpiece. He was in the Guggenheim. That's where he was. So it didn't matter by the time he got to Denver. With Fields, it matters. With Fields, they are in the very fragile, early, we can still F this up phase. That's why. And, Peter, if they think they know that Matt Eberflus is going to be a great head coach, they are deluding themselves. They don't know. We don't know. No one knows. And that's why I love this time of year, because we're going to see all of the superlatives on Twitter. All the people who don't know jack crap about these candidates. Oh, great hire, Bears. Great hire, Bears. Hey, can I interview him now? Great hire. No, we don't know. Nobody knows. All these hires can be great. And I guarantee you a third of them are going to get fired within 5 years. That's just the way it goes.
5 years? 3 years? Half of them will get fired within 3 years. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'd say half within 3 years. But you're right. I mean, look, I remember when Vic Fangio got the Denver job, and Elway was a genius for finally going adult in the room, defensive head coach. Don't worry, we're going to find a quarterback and we're going to find a great offensive mind to work with him. Look, Mike, I have said this. I've covered the NFL for 38 years, and I think I've been saying it for 36. If you don't have a quarterback, you can have Vince Lombardi as the head coach and Bill Parcells as your defensive coordinator. And Bill Walsh is your offensive coordinator. And you know what? You're going 7-10 next year. That's just the way it is. So don't tell me that if you put in Mike Glennon, but you've got Belichick, Parcells, Walsh, Lombardi, you're going to be okay. That's crazy. We saw what happened when Bill Belichick had half a quarterback in 2020 in Cam Newton. He went 7-9. It went better with Mac Jones, obviously, and they're on their way, I think, with Mac Jones. But unless you have a quarterback, it doesn't matter what other elements you have. So I totally understand, but that's why I say that the Bears, when they interviewed coaches, they had to say Eberflus is markedly better than any guy on the offensive side of the ball, and that's why they had to have hired him.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. Obviously, but they're still making a projection, and there's a chance they could be wrong about it. I mean, hell, John Fox got fired in Denver, and he went to a Super Bowl and went to a divisional round, and they lost at home to the Colts, and that got you. He didn't get fired for being bad. He got fired for not being good enough. That's, I said this the other day. You could have 32 great coaches, 32 great GMs, and you're still going to have teams that go 7-10, 6-11, 5-12, because you can't have a good team without a bad team, and the bad teams are always going to try to get better, or good teams who are dissatisfied by not being better than what they are are going to look to upgrade. You know, it's one of the conversations we've had about the Dallas Cowboys the past 2 weeks. Is Jerry Jones going to try to upgrade? Mike McCarthy's not bad. The Cowboys aren't bad, but maybe they can be better. Rich Bisaccia, the interim head coach of the Raiders, has been linked to the special teams coordinator gig in Chicago. He and Matt Eberflus are close, and it's a relationship-driven league. Look, that's how you find landing spots. That's how you get the job. Matt Eberflus, one of the things he says when he goes in to meet with Ryan Poles and Bill Polian and George McCaskey, hey, I think I'm confident my special teams coordinator is going to be Rich Bisaccia. Yeah. Look at what Rich Bisaccia did as the interim head coach of the Raiders. You're going to have him next year if I get this job. You're going to have him available to help me, to help show me and be another voice that elevates this team. I'm going to deliver him. And it looks like he's going to do that, assuming that Bisaccia doesn't get the Raiders head coaching job. And I think at this point, that's becoming a more and more fair assumption.
Yeah, I mean, the Raiders from the start, I think when Mark Davis dismissed Mike Mayock, that was the end for Rich Bisaccia, because Mayock was the biggest cheerleader for Bisaccia in the building. And so every time you look at the Raiders, and as much as we all might say that Bisaccia deserved another shot, you know, we're not Mark Davis. And once he got rid of Mayock, it was pretty clear that he was going to go play the field. And right now, I think with one furlong to go, Josh McDaniels is ahead, and he's ahead by a little bit more than a nose.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and let's focus on that. Now, I had heard over the weekend that, and, you know, you hear different things on the grapevine, but the grapevine, as you know, it's a tapestry. I may not be using the right word, but I really don't care. But there's a lot of different people at different stops on the grapevine, and any time I hear the same thing from two people who are in vastly different portions of the grapevine, that tells me it's real.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.